A sealed classroom kept calling students by name, long after the class was disbanded. The voice behind the door didn't threaten, it just followed protocol, marking absent for anyone who refused to answer. Min-seo thought she could escape the list, but the system was older than memory, and it only needed one word from her: here. But just wait until you hear how this haunting ritual reached its final tick, and why justice, in the strangest way, finally prevailed. They said classroom 32 was off limits. A sign taped to the chain door read, "Under renovation, do not enter." The windows were X-taped in faded blue. Dust clung to the pane like frost, and the overhead lights were disconnected at the breaker. Most students didn't even look in that direction anymore. It had been closed since spring term, after a leaky pipe flooded half the third floor. But no one had seen any workers since. No drills, no paint fumes, no ladders. Just silence, and a door that hadn't moved in months. That week was the start of Yagan Jayul Haksip, mandatory night study, and every junior student was assigned a classroom to stay in until 10 p.m. Min-seo's classroom was 3-4, just 2 doors down. The corridor stretched quiet and long at that hour, bathed in sterile fluorescent light. Most rooms were cracked open for air, their mop buckets resting outside like tired soldiers, their desks pushed back into rows. The silence felt routine, normal. She liked it that way. Until the second night. Min-seo had stepped out briefly to get water from the hallway cooler when she heard it. A voice from behind the locked door. Not a whisper. Not a sound carried on air vents or distant heels echoing down the stairwell. It was a voice saying her name. Kim Min-seo. Calm, measured. Exactly like a teacher reading from the attendance sheet at the start of homeroom. It had the familiar rhythm, even the pause after her name, the kind teachers used when they expected a response. Min-seo stood frozen by the cooler, fingers tight around her paper cup. There was no one else on the third floor. No footsteps, no giggling students. Just the quiet hum of ceiling lights and that door, shut tight and undisturbed. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of memory maybe. A late-night announcement echoing weirdly in the corridor. Maybe someone was playing a prank from inside one of the classrooms. She returned to her seat, tried to forget. But the next night, the voice came again. 9:07 p.m. Right between her third practice test and the moment the security guard usually shuffled by with his thermos. She wasn't near the door this time. She was at her desk, pen in hand. And still, clear as if it were right outside, Kim Min-seo. The pen slipped from her fingers. She turned to the others, but her classmates were buried in textbooks, heads down, headphones in. No one else heard it. No one reacted. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just an echo. This was her name, spoken at the same time, in the same tone. Again. The third night, she walked slowly past the sealed door on her way to the restroom, her steps deliberately quiet. The corridor was empty as always, lockers dim, cleaning tools untouched, the only sound, her breath. She stopped in front of room 32 and leaned in, ear pressed softly to the cold metal surface. The door felt strangely warm. She waited. For a while, there was nothing. Then, a sound, faint, soft, like chalk being picked up, a dry dragging across a board, the click of a marker cap being opened, and then, barely audible, the gentle shh of someone writing. No laughter, no movement, just writing. When she brought it up to her homeroom teacher the next day, Mr. Jong Tae-hyun gave her the weary smile he reserved for overworked students. Renovation rooms echo. Old pipes, hollow walls. You're probably just tired, Min-seo. It's the stress. Focus on your sunung. He rubbed at his temple, then offered her a candy from his drawer. He wasn't unkind, just exhausted. He had 30 students on his shoulders and the school's test rankings to think about. His concern came with limits. She understood. His motivation wasn't to dismiss her. It was to avoid panic. But her best friend, Ji-won, wasn't so easily convinced. Sharp-tongued, restless, and curious in ways that always got them both into trouble, Ji-won said, "Let's test it. Tonight." So they waited. At 9:06 p.m., both girls stood just outside room 32, pretending to scroll through their phones. The hallway buzzed softly, lights humming overhead. The windows at the far end reflected their silhouettes, two students alone on the third floor, doing what they were told not to do. Then, at exactly 9:07, Min-seo. Both girls froze. It was loud, clear, not filtered through a wall, not echoing from another floor. It came from inside the chained room. Ji-won's lips parted in disbelief. Then a second call came, softer this time, more tentative, like the voice wasn't sure it had been heard the first time. "Present?" Min-seo didn't answer, couldn't, her throat locked up. Ji-won grabbed her wrist. "Run." They bolted down the stairs. 20 steps in, they heard it. The school speaker system gave a soft crackle, not loud enough to be alarming, but just enough to catch. Then, silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of chalk striking a board. One single check mark. Behind a locked door. When the security guard found them near the entrance, catching their breath and pretending nothing had happened, he asked casually why they weren't at their desks. "Bathroom," Ji-won muttered. The guard didn't care. He'd already turned back to his phone. But as they passed room 32 again, Min-seo slowed. She stared at the fogged glass. The windows had always been too dirty to see inside. But now, one square patch had been wiped clean. Inside, stuck against the glass, something that hadn't been there before. A pale rectangle, like a seating chart. And, in the condensation on the lower left panel, someone had written a number with their fingertip. 24. Min-seo's seat number. Not in room 32, in her real classroom, in 3-4. The implication was quiet, precise. Something in that room knew her name, knew her number, knew her routine. And it wasn't done reading the list. The next morning, Min-seo stopped being afraid and started taking notes. If this was real, it had to follow rules, patterns, and patterns could be tracked. She told herself that fear was just mismanaged information. If you could gather clean data, if you could isolate the signal from the noise, you could find the trick behind it. The human mind, after all, was prone to misfiring, hallucinations, stress, auditory echoes, all explainable. If this was someone's prank, or worse, her own imagination, she needed proof before it spread in her brain like mold. So she made a plan. That night, just after the last practice set ended and the others sank into their phones, Min-seo excused herself early for a restroom break. But instead of heading downstairs, she stepped into the mop closet across from room 32 and pulled out her phone. She opened the voice memo app, set it to record. Propped the phone in a corner on top of the cleaning supplies, just outside the sealed door. No flashlight, no noise. She closed the closet, left it ajar just enough for sound to slip in, then walked away, timing her return to look natural. She waited in her seat, eyes on the clock. 9:05, 9:06. Then, 9:07 p.m. The corridor remained silent. No voices, no doors, nothing. The recording picked up nothing for the first 2 minutes. Then it happened. Min-seo. No footsteps, no breathing. Just that, her full name, spoken in the same calm, teacherly tone. And then, so soft it made her skin crawl. The scrape of a desk leg moving. The quiet click of a wooden pencil rolling slowly across a flat surface, coming to a stop. That was all. She played the recording back 3 times, headphones tight in her ears. Each time, the sounds were the same, too clean, too isolated. And when she glanced at the auto-generated caption beneath the waveform, the app had assigned a title without her input: Attendance. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she approached Mr. Jang during break, her hands clenched around her phone like a lifeline. He listened to the recording once, then again, expression flat. When it ended, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes slowly, deliberately. Audio pareidolia, he said. Your brain fills in what it expects to hear. He returned her phone without another word, face drawn with exhaustion. She recognized that look. He wasn't trying to dismiss her. He was trying to keep a lid on something that could spin into chaos. I'll ask maintenance to check the ventilation. Could be a radio or static caught in a pipe. The way he said it, too calm, too fast, it wasn't denial. It was containment. She realized his motivation had changed. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about the school. If word spread that a classroom was calling students, what then? Parents would complain, exams would be disrupted. Worse, fear would go viral, and schools feared nothing more than rumor. So he filed it away under psychological stress, smiled a teacher's tired smile, and told her to study harder. Ji-won wasn't so easy to shut down. I don't care if it's a ghost or a bored janitor, she said. We'll open it. That night, as the guard rolled past with his thermos, Ji-won crouched beside the chained padlock and slid a thin hairpin into the mechanism. Her hands were quick, practiced. The pin snapped. The lock didn't move. Min-seo's breath caught. They both turned to the frosted glass. There it was again. That rectangle wiped clean, like a seating chart. But now, beneath the number 24, a small vertical mark had appeared. A tick. Simple, straight, precise. The kind teachers use when marking someone present. Neither girl said a word. They backed away. And that night, when 9:07 came, the voice did not simply call Min-seo's name. It changed. First, it called her in Mr. Jang's exact tone of voice, his cadence, his inflection. Then, a moment later, in her mother's voice, gentle, familiar, full of warmth. Then again, but this time with a voice neither of them recognized. A girl's voice, quiet, worn, practiced, as if it had been calling names forever. Each voice sounded more real than the last. Each time, the name was spoken with expectation, with structure, with rules. Min-seo tried to sleep with the lights on, but the silence only made it worse. In the morning, she found fine white dust under her fingernails. Not sand, not lint, chalk. She hadn't touched chalk in weeks. Her school-issued rollbook had her name pressed so hard into the page that the paper beneath was torn. And when she looked up at the old TV monitor in their homeroom, a unit unplugged since the semester began, it showed nothing but static. Static shaped like rows, like desk outlines, and something dark, shaped like a person, sitting still at the teacher's podium. She blinked. The static returned to noise. She didn't tell anyone, not that day. Her aunt, hearing the change in her voice over a weekend call, arranged for a mudang, a local shaman, to come by and bless the hallway. The woman stood barefoot on the third floor at sunrise, sprinkled salt along the wall opposite 3-2, and whispered, "Old places keep lists." That was all. The old school custodian, one of the few who had worked there before the 2010 renovation, told her something else. "I've seen the light inside that room turn on at night," he muttered, folding a rag over his mop. "The breaker says off, the circuit says off, but sometimes rooms hate being empty." The next day, Ji-won told her bluntly, "Stop responding. It's just a loop. It wants you to play along, so we stop playing." Min-seo tried. That night, when the voice came, she bit her lip and stayed silent. 9:07. Kim Min-seo. She didn't answer. 9:08. Kim Min-seo. Still nothing. 9:09. Kim Min-seo. The voice had not changed, but something in its rhythm had sharpened. There was less warmth now, less patience. The fourth call came, and this time it didn't use her name. It used a word she'd never heard in school. Cold, final, bureaucratic. Absent. It said it like a verdict. And for the first time, the classroom door rattled. Just once. As if something inside was checking to see whether she was really not there. By now, Min-seo wasn't just afraid. She was curious. Fear had calcified into something harder, something sharper. She was done waiting to be called like a student late to class. She wanted answers. She needed structure. If this thing was real, if it was more than fatigue, more than imagination, it had to have a history. And every institution in Korea had one thing in common: records. She began with the obvious. During lunch, while Mr. Jang was distracted by a conference with a parent, Min-seo quietly slipped into the administrative records room. She knew where the key was kept, taped behind the fire extinguisher cabinet, a trick she'd overheard from the class vice president last semester. The room was silent, lined with steel cabinets and shelves that bowed under decades of files. It smelled like paper and wet fabric, like old tests left out in the rain and dried in secret. She started with the Peiban Kirok, discontinued classroom reports. Classroom 3-2 had a file, a thin one. She opened the dusty binder and flipped through the documents. They were ordered by year, handwritten in blocky Hangul on yellowing paper. No digital files, just names and seating charts. 2004. That was the year the renovations began, the year the room was sealed. She scanned the names. Page after page of student rosters and instructor logs. Each class had a seating chart with rows and numbers, little hand-drawn desk maps. Row 3, seat 2, Han Se-yan. Row 4, seat empty. Row 5, seat 4, a blank space with a penciled note beside it, nearly erased by time. Transferred? Unconfirmed. She squinted. The handwriting was faint, but the implication was chilling. The school had no confirmation whether that student ever formally left. There were 3 pages total for class 3-2. But the next sheet was missing. Clean tear, ripped at the binding. Page 4, gone. She flipped the entire binder upside down, hoping the page had been misfiled, but nothing fell out. She checked the table of contents. The list said 1. Roster, 2. Seating map, 3. Final grades, 4. Attendance sheets. She had found the first 3. The attendance sheet was the one that was missing. Her breath caught in her throat. The same type of sheet she'd seen materialize outside the mop closet. Suddenly, she wasn't sure if this was research anymore, or trespassing into something that didn't want to be cataloged. She took a photo of the seating map and left the records room in silence, heart pounding under her uniform. Later that evening, she brought the image up on her phone and compared it to her current classroom. There'd been a renumbering since 2004, buildings restructured, class names reassigned, but the physical desk layout matched. The seat marked as transferred, unconfirmed. That was her seat now, number 24. And the name beside Han Se-yan's, the empty space, was likely that of her best friend. A student who was there, and then wasn't. A ghost not of a person, but of a registration entry never completed. Min-seo wasn't just answering for herself. She was occupying someone else's place, a name never crossed off. She found the custodian again after last period. The older man was mopping the stairwell, humming a song from decades ago. His eyes, when she asked about 2004, did not blink. He wiped his hands on a rag. That winter, he said, was bitter. Gas heaters were still used back then. One malfunctioned. Evening self-study students felt dizzy. Nobody died. That's what the school said. But they canceled classes the next day anyway. Called it a safety break. He looked at the wall, not at her. The room was sealed not long after. The smell wouldn't go away. Not from the air, not from the floorboards. She hesitated. Was there a student who disappeared? The custodian tapped a coffee ring on a nearby cart. That's the part nobody agreed on. The problem wasn't who vanished. It was whose name got read, whose response got recorded. There were arguments about the attendance. The register had too many checks. Too many? She asked. He nodded once. One more tick than there were desks. Her skin prickled. At home, her mother's calls became more frequent. "You're not eating," she said. "You sound tired. You don't look like yourself." Her father recommended a clinic. Her homeroom teacher sent her to the school counselor. The counselor's office was warm, softly lit, with a gentle diffuser that made the air smell of dried oranges. The woman across from her had a kind voice. She used all the right words: burnout, anxiety, cumulative stress. Sometimes, the counselor said, when pressure builds, the mind creates familiar forms, names, voices, especially in a school setting. Her voice was understanding, but the message was clear. Label it, and it can't hurt you. Each adult she spoke to wasn't malicious. They were just trying to put the story in a small, manageable box, to fold it flat, to make the strange sound like symptoms, not signals. But Min-seo couldn't unsee what she'd seen. She couldn't ignore the salt on the hallway floor, the missing records, the voice that shifted tone depending on who it imitated. That night, at exactly 9:07, the voice came again. But this time, it didn't say her name first. It said something different, older, formal, a phrase she'd only heard in old dramas or from elderly teachers taking morning roll. "Answer, please." Her lips trembled. For the first time, she broke. "Here," she whispered, barely louder than her breath. And something changed. The silence afterward was thick. It felt like the building itself had inhaled and held it. Then the sound of pages turning. 1, 2, 3, dozens, rustling, organized, methodical. Then a second voice replied. Not the one that called her name. A different voice, thinner, almost brittle, as if spoken by someone whose mouth hadn't opened in years. Noted. It sounded relieved. For 20 whole minutes, nothing happened. No footsteps, no rattling, no doors opening by themselves. Min-seo's shoulders sagged. Ji-won, who had been bracing for disaster, let out a nervous laugh. "See? Bureaucracy appeased," she whispered. But then, a sound overhead, a click. The ceiling speaker, the one used for morning announcements, crackled softly. The second voice returned, closer now, as if it stood just behind her shoulder. Next, Min-seo spun toward the sound. Down the hall, the mop closet door, which had always stayed firmly shut, was now wide open. Inside, lit by a single flickering light above the doorway, was her phone. It had been carefully placed upright, balanced on a new stack of attendance slips, stacked perfectly, like paperwork ready for grading. The top slip was visible from where she stood. It had her name, printed twice, once in bold black ink, once again in faint gray, like a carbon copy, as if the room had begun duplicating her and filing her, like an entry in a ledger that didn't want to be forgotten.
Min-seo believed she could run. Not far, just far enough. Her parents agreed it was only temporary. A short-term transfer to Busan, where her aunt had space, and the school had agreed to accept outside students for the fall term. The official word was rest, a mental health leave to recover from academic burnout. But no one said aloud what they all understood. Get her away from the third floor. Papers were signed, stamps were thudded. Mr. Jang, pale from weeks of polite denial, gathered signatures with the urgency of someone trying to outrun a rumor before it found legs. He didn't look her in the eye when he said, "You'll come back with a fresh mind." He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the building, to whatever had started watching her from behind the glass of classroom 3-2. Her departure was scheduled for the following Monday. That Friday night, Min-seo returned to the third floor one last time. She told herself it was closure, just a ritual, something symbolic, like lighting incense at a memorial you don't fully believe in. She wasn't even sure why she needed to see the door again. Maybe she just needed to know if the thing behind it had truly let her go. But when she turned the corner, the chain on the door was loose. Not cut, not broken, just hanging, slack, as if someone had unhooked it and simply walked away. Ji-won, who had followed her in silent protest, sucked in her breath. "That's not locked." Min-seo hesitated. The hall was empty. No footsteps, no monitors, no cleaners. Just the static hum of fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of old books and plastic wrap. "Let's be stupid for 5 minutes," Ji-won muttered. They both stared at the handle. Then slowly they pressed. The door gave, only a crack. Just enough for air to slip out. Stale, sweet, chemical, like glue left to dry inside a sealed bottle. They stepped inside. No alarms, no footsteps, just silence. The room was darker than it should have been. Light from the corridor barely reached the far wall. Desks were stacked 2 at a time and draped in plastic, each one like a shape in mourning. The podium stood in the corner, casting a shadow larger than it should have been. No hum from the lights, no flickering screens. But the moonlight through the taped windows painted a pale square across the blackboard. And dust motes danced in the beam like floating ash. At the center of the room, one desk stood apart. Unlike the others, it wasn't covered. Instead, something was placed atop it, deliberately, carefully, as if for ritual. A roll book, spine cracked, pages exposed. They stepped closer. There was no dust on it. The paper inside was clean, crisp. No student names yet. No writing. Only a single heading at the top of the open page. Name, present, late, absent. 4 columns, empty, waiting. Ji-won narrowed her eyes. "Let's just burn it." She said it like a joke, but only half. Min-seo reached out. The pages were cold. Not just cool from the air, but cold enough to sting. As her fingers brushed the paper, she felt something unfamiliar bloom behind her eyes. Not pain, not quite pressure. It was like the slow build of tears that hadn't yet been cried. From the hallway speaker, clear and unfazed, "Kim Ji-won." It sounded exactly like a morning roll call. Flat, professional, expected. Ji-won froze. "It said my—" "Don't answer," Min-seo said quickly. A second call. "Kim Ji-won." This time, it came with a pause at the end, an invitation, the kind that waits with perfect politeness for a reply. "Don't," Min-seo repeated, firmer. But something in that routine tone, that everyday familiarity, it pulled at the reflex. The way students respond without thinking. The way trained behavior slips past logic. Third call. "Kim Ji-won." And Ji-won whispered, barely audible, "Here." It was instinct, that was all. The room exhaled. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. It exhaled. The air pressure shifted. Plastic coverings trembled. The lights above flickered, even though the breaker had been shut off months ago. On the blackboard, 2 thin tick marks appeared in white chalk. 24, 17, both marked as present. The 2 girls didn't speak. They ran. As they slammed the door behind them, the chain whipped back against the frame. It didn't fall. It closed, snapped into place as if it had never come loose. Only once they were halfway down the stairwell did Min-seo look down. Both of their wrists bore faint smudges, oval stamps, fuzzy ink, the kind teachers pressed on your hand during field trips, proof that you checked in. She scrubbed hers in the restroom for 10 minutes. The mark didn't fade. The next day, her aunt called. "There's been a delay. One form didn't go through. Your school faxed the wrong date." Her move would have to wait until the following week. That night, Min-seo returned to her desk in classroom 3-4. She didn't want to, but her parents insisted, one more night of study before the weekend. At 9:07 p.m., the voice came again. But it didn't say her name. It said Ji-won's. "Kim Ji-won." Once, then again. Ji-won didn't show up for night study that evening. Her mother texted a teacher group chat. "She's not feeling well. Went to bed early with a fever." No explanation. And still, the call came a third time. Then, from the speaker outside room 3-2, a new voice emerged.
This time, it wasn't robotic or formal. It used Min-seo's mother's voice. Gentle, loving, slightly tired. "You're both late." Min-seo left her seat and ran straight to the school office. She begged. She told the truth, or as much as she dared. The principal sat behind a clean desk, staring with the expression of a man counting problems instead of solving them. "You will not speak of this to other students," he said, hands folded. "We don't tolerate superstition in this school." He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply dismissed. And then, with a quick email to facilities, he ordered the door to classroom 3-2 permanently sealed. The next morning, a welder came in. The chain was removed, the handle reinforced, metal brackets drilled into the door frame. The job took less than 10 minutes. By the end of lunch, the door to 3-2 was welded shut. No one could get in now. But that night, at exactly 9:07 p.m., through layers of steel and concrete and effort, the speaker above the hallway lockers crackled softly. "Kim Ji-won." And the call slid through the seal like water through cloth.
On the morning of the mock exam, the school was quieter than usual. Desks were arranged with military precision. Teachers wore their most formal expressions. The vice principal's voice echoed over the school PA, reading out regulations, timing rules, prohibited items, instructions for what to do if your pencil broke or if you needed a replacement sheet. But then, something odd. Just before the feed cut off, between the final instruction and the microphone click, there was one more sound, quieter than the rest. From the speaker near the stairwell to the third floor, almost masked by static, came a single word: attendance. No one else seemed to notice. But Min-seo did. She felt it like a cold thread along her spine. The syllables weren't threatening. They were routine, ordinary, worn down from repetition. She took her seat for the math section, hands trembling slightly as she aligned her ID on the desk. Her proctor, a young teacher from the science department, sighed as the fluorescent lights above flickered. "Breaker still not fixed," he mumbled, then added, "Keep working, time's still running." The clock stayed lit. She bent over her test. On question 24, her pencil hovered briefly. Then she froze. Just beside the bubble for answer C, a small, perfect check mark had appeared. Neat, centered, drawn by no hand she could see. She hadn't touched that part of the page yet. And she knew. By lunch, the sun had shifted, and the air in the corridors had grown sticky, as if the school itself was holding its breath. Mr. Jang found her outside the music room. He looked older than he had just a week ago. Tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, voice tired enough to betray the truth. "I looked," he said, before she could speak, "through everything." She waited. The renovation logs for room 3-2 are useless. Copies of copies, blurred stamps, signatures traced over others. No one remembers who signed what. He paused. "But I found a note. Maintenance report, 2004. It said, keeps listing names that are not present." She swallowed. "We changed the room numbers after that," he added. "Thought if we reclassified it, gave it a new label, maybe it wouldn't find us again." His voice broke slightly, not from emotion, but from something deeper, recognition, the understanding that something he once dismissed had quietly outlived them all. "We thought the system needed a person," he said, eyes glassy, "but maybe it just needs a name." He looked at her, pleading, not for help, not for forgiveness, but for understanding, and for something she could not give. The final bell rang. Students streamed into the late afternoon haze, talking about lunch, scores, weekend plans, the usual. Nothing had changed for them. But Min-seo did not follow them out. Instead, she turned and walked up, alone, toward the third floor. The corridor felt colder than the rest of the school, even though the windows let in light. The door to room 3-2 stood silent and shut, its welded seam bright and unnatural against the old wood, as if the school had tried to cover a scar with fresh paint. On the taped-over windows, new markings had appeared in the condensation. Her number, 24, still visible. Jiwon's, 17, next to it. And more now. Unfinished digits, 33, 11, 09. Some full, some trailing off mid-stroke, like names half-spoken. She stared at the fogged glass. And then the voice returned. Kim, Min-seo. But angry, not forceful. It was gentle, familiar, the tone of a teacher who's called a name 3 times and is simply waiting. She stood there, listening, frozen in the hallway, like a student late to class, deciding whether to lie or tell the truth. She realized then this wasn't about revenge, or memory, or pain. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a procedure. A list that needed completion. No emotion, no cruelty, just the pressure of something old and automated still following its last instruction. Call the name, wait for the reply, mark the sheet, repeat. Her fear had been about being haunting, but this wasn't haunting. It was filing. Min-seo pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The condensation fogged slightly under her breath, and in the stillness of the hallway she whispered, "Here." Nothing moved, no wind, no voices, but something in the air seemed to relax, like a burden set down. The overhead lights brightened. The silence thickened, not with dread, but with finality. Footsteps echoed down the corridor behind her. She turned. No one. Just the long stretch of hallway, the posters about safety, the classroom doors, closed and ordinary. She returned to her desk the next day. It was perfect. Eraser aligned, pencil freshly sharpened, her attendance card already in the tray. When the homeroom teacher called her name that morning, she answered automatically, no hesitation. But at 9:07 p.m., in the quiet breath between study drills and the guards' rounds, the speaker in the hallway did not call her name. It called someone new. Once, twice, a third time. And somewhere, not far, not close, just somewhere, came a whisper, "Here." And the system moved forward. Weeks passed. Min-seo kept studying. She still heard the 9:07 call, sometimes faintly. She no longer flinched. Jiwon didn't return to night study. No one asked why. The new students never heard the full story, but they whispered. Not about a ghost, not anymore, but about a classroom that's never truly empty. Some say that if you pass the 3rd floor at exactly 9:07, you'll hear something faint like a page turning in a book no one holds. And if you're very still, you might hear a pencil scratch, a name being marked. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's a name you recognize. Eventually, construction begins. The school approves a remodel. The 3rd floor is set for repurposing. Workers come to cut the welded door. It takes them longer than expected. When the door finally opens, the room is empty. No desks, no bodies, no signs of damage. Just a podium. And resting on it, as if waiting all this time, is a single rollbook. Its pages appear blank until you get close. And then, just faintly, you hear a voice. Kind, soft, routine. A teacher's voice. Name. Because the list still exists. Because the ledger still breathes. And the lesson lasts as long as the names do. And in schools like this, the list is impossible to finish.